Hi, this is Damien from AtHope, and I am an axiological atheist, which can simply be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. And today I would like to discuss a little bit on goddesses. And now, I'm taking this, of course, from an atheist perspective, but my real goal is just to understand truth and to basically expose the evolution of religion, and that definitely refers to things like gods and goddesses as well. And my goal of doing this is to inform people and also to help understand how religion became the thing that it is today. And one of the reasons I like to explain the evolution of religion is to deeply remove the rationale of faith. Because the more that we can understand with evidence, the man-made, in a sense, human-created element that is so easily seen, in religion, especially when you look at it from a big picture perspective. So let's get to referring to the deities. So to me, it's really asceticism and agriculture, revolution that really spawns the creation, of gods and goddesses. And goddesses, to me, come first, right at the beginning, sometime around 12,000 years ago, and male gods sometime around 7,000 years ago, and to 5,000 years ago. And the point is that this thing that became gods, in a sense, didn't just start, in a sense, right out of nothing. Everything, in a sense, in religion is an evolved product. So the concept of goddess or Mother Earth or whatever, to me, was just a general kind of an anthropomorphic idea of nature that then, in a sense, became like an ancestor, in the fact that or a metaphorical ancestor for larger groups, like in the fact of saying that clan, ancestor for the whole clan, when in a sense that it's not a genetic quality that you're totally referring to. You're also referring to an identity of personhood related to other people. So in relationship to the birth of deities, I surmise, that asceticism and agricultural revolution beginning around 12,000 years ago, lasting until around 4,000 years ago, when it became, in a sense, the general norm. It was involved, I think, in the creation of goddesses. And the reason why I think it did this is there was already, in a sense, to me, sort of a spirit nature or feminine nature attached to the moon, I believe, and as it and then the sun also, but these things were, to me, more abstract concepts, not direct deities, in a sense, as we would think of them today. But as they became, in a sense, having new needs for this religious magic ideas, once they had agricultural and needed to, have things grow, that in a sense became, the goddess. And one of the reasons I think goddess is attached with the moon, especially the phase of the moon, is at a certain point, in a sense, the moon is growing, and I see that in a sense as them seeing like a woman's belly, like in pregnancy. So the association, I think, with the moon, and it's like growing into the full moon, like full pregnancy. So I think that's in a sense, I think that started probably in totemism, if not, 50,000 years ago, then by about 30,000 years ago in shamanism, it started, because there's already evidence of them taking notations of 34,000 years ago on a bone of the, cycles of the moon. And so this addresses things like this early agricultural cult ritualism, which I see as, in a sense, a shamanistic paganism. And to me, everything, in a sense, is not all by itself. Everything starts, in a sense, animism, this sort of like belief in the spirit world and the ability, in a sense, of an afterlife, that you can do something, or somehow things happen here and then you have an afterlife. And then it develops, that's like a loose idea of just how you view the world, like a lens to see the world, in a sense, as everything being magical and alive. And then, to me, totemism is humans start creating things to represent these ideas that they're coming up with, and to form clan groups around these shared totems. And then I think that, with shamanism, then you start getting, in a sense, a special person, to commune with this believed spirit world and to use the totems, and to be, in a sense, an animist, and in fact, of believing in spirit-filled worlds. So it's just building and then layering on top of each other. And then paganism, I think, is, in a sense, is just like an offshoot of shamanism, where you have a larger structure of people taking care of things, special people, instead of just a shaman, in a sense, like a clan shaman. And then, to me, you also have where you're adding, deity. So I think it's probably similar to what a shaman, in a sense, was already talking to believed spirit beings, or communing with them, or begging them, talking to them, praying them, whatever, within a trance or whatever. The point is that they're doing this already, in a sense, in shamanism, kind of talking to spirit beings that are special. And then I think they just get added, in a sense, to like a clan idea of leader or whatever, and then it just morphs into deities. And also at this time, I think there's a kind of first patriarchy scene, where I think there's a split, in a sense, of female status, to where before, I think a female had more diversity, in the lifespan. There are some of the figures that are round and have no arms or whatever. I think when they have no arms, and either they have big breasts, or big butts, or big stomachs, or just overall fat, big hips, something. I think that's representing, to me, the full moon, especially when they don't have, in a sense, arms, because at a certain crescent at the beginning and then a crescent at the end would be, to me, likely the new one being the crescent arms, like up or something, or could be horns or hair up, or I think that's relating to in a sense, the sky. And then when the moon's full, just in a sense, a fat woman or whatever, and then arms around their body in some way, or no arms at all, and or in the front, sort of. And then I think at the arms at the side is more like, aiming down, as far as the underworld or something like that. So the dispersion of goddesses or Venus figurines, or whatever you want to call them, I think that they don't start, in a sense, with being deities. I don't think there's really... I think they're kind of like ancestor, great grandmother, great, grandfather or something, kind of ideas. And also, I think that they, especially because of totemism, there's a lack of, which I think really starts in animism, and the fact that you have a belief that the natural world, whether it's humans or animals, is not so fixed, in the sense that they can change and morph. And that's, in a sense, seen sometimes in shamanism, where they believe they can become animals. And also the thought, that animals could represent things like, thunder being either a bull, charging or whatever, or the sound of a lion, roaring. And so I think that's why there's an attachment to this, feminine being the bull, or a sky god, being a bull, is attached to that thunder sound. And then the same thing with cats, lions, they're large roar, the same as the thunder. And so to me, these ideas are spread, and you can see the dispersal, even though it's not directly connected, there are connections. And to me, it kind of, starts about somewhere around 40 to 50,000 years ago, with the organization culture, which was kind of like the first, humans into, in a big way, because there already was a few people coming in, but in a big way, the first humans into Europe. And then I think that it's possible when they met, the other arcane humans that were already, in a sense, having other ideas and mated with them, there could have been some religious transfer, inspiring, the emergence of totemism around, 50,000 years to 30,000 years ago. And then after that, in the culture that kind of different culture that it's similar, but pushes sort of the organization people, into Spain and into then they go from there into North Africa, is the Gravettian people, and they make a lot more since these spirit figures or whatever. I see them as kind of like hunting magic or whatever. The interesting too is there's some that are in Russia, and they appear to be, like they're being tied up with their, in a sense, hands, in front of them, almost like they're in shackles. Now, I don't know if this is a representation of the moon just being full, and they're saying that its arms are, not, sticking out, and thus a full moon, and not a crescent, moon that's about to, in a sense, die, or not the new crescent. Or it's possible that it directly represents, the first, in a sense, sex slavery or something. So I think that we need to be careful that some people have an opinion that because there's all this women, in a sense, being represented in figurines, that means that in a sense that women were equal. And I'm like, yeah, just like thinking that because we had, in a sense, the first African American president, that there's no more, racism. So I don't think that ideas and behavior always go, hand to hand. Just like a lot of, in a sense, Christians would say, oh, well, you should not, watch porn. And yet I know a lot of Christians only watch porn. They engage in, in making porn. So I think that we need to understand that even though I think the later ones become goddesses, in sense that with 30,000 years ago, that's just not happening to me. So then you have the Magdalenian, and to me they are a lot more of an abstract Venus, in a sense, figures. And an interesting thing is that these Magdalenian people, they're from, in a sense, their older ancestors are the Organatians that were, in a sense, pushed by the Gravetans into Spain and northern Africa. They then emerged, in a sense, back into Europe. But to me, they also, the ones that had gone to North Africa, those people that didn't go back into Europe, some of them went all the way to Israel. So this brings me up to the Magdalenian early sitting Venus. And this Venus of Corbett is 15,000 years ago from France. And it's made of red quartzite. And it's fat, sitting in a sense with no arms. And I think that this could represent the full moon and thus, the ideas of like fertility and also Earth itself. But I think that this also could be a representation which we later see, springing up at least by 10,000 years ago in Israel and then in Turkey, this sitting goddess phenomenon. And they're also, with some of the other figurines that are found in the Magdalenian cave artifacts, include things that are advanced like bone needles and bone whistles. And there already was, in a sense, bone flutes that were happening at even earlier ages, almost 40,000 years ago. And the part, this is the sitting goddess thing is just part of, in a sense, the Magdalenian Venuses dating from 17,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago. And to me, they all have sort of not all, but a lot of them have sort of a sitting or a, in a sense, their rear end, sticking out, kind of a posture. And they're always, in a sense, is stylistic. I think the stylistic, to me, is the most interesting in the fact that I think that is probably attached to the fact that it's becoming more abstract, which to me, I think the fact of this early hunting magic stuff turning into a real abstraction is actually, I think, what is a good foundation for it to later become goddesses. DNA from Morocco or North Africa shows human populations had links that stretched across continuance as far back as 25,000 years ago. And experts, have concluded from nuclear DNA of people who lived around 15,000 years ago. The connection between Africa and the Levant date back even further than thought. The region's inhabitants were the first to produce stone tools. 2/3 of their heredity is related to the population from the Near East. And 1/3 is most similar to modern-day sub-Saharan Africans. The high proportion of Near East ancestry shows that connections between the continents of Africa and Asia began earlier, in fact much earlier than many previously thought. And the high portion of East ancestry is interesting, especially the fact of the connections to North Africa to Levant, especially when, like I said, you have areas in southern Spain and France where you have these Magdalenian Venuses, and those people also could have been in North Africa and then took that idea and shared it or transferred it to the people in Israel. And this culture had lithic technology that was found in Morocco, Algeria, and it also is known from sites in Libya. And the Urban industry is a name for the East African tool assemblages that date back about 15,000 years ago and thereafter, found in areas of the Rift Valley in Kenya, coming from this North African distribution from Europe, from southern Spain. The culture was known as the Kenyan Caspian because findings resembled those of North African, Caspian, trans-Saharan culture, formerly called the Kenyan Agurian. The assemblages that were found at Gabella's cave comprise large bracelets and crescent motifs. There's also some other tools made of obsidian. DNA from Morocco shows that populations stretch back as far as 25,000 years ago. The people who lived around 20,000 to 10,000 years ago are believed to be the first in the area to produce these finer stone tools known as microliths. DNA evidence revealed that 2/3 of their heritage is related to populations in the Levant, such as the modern areas that could comprise Israel, Cyprus, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, and parts of Turkey, especially southern Turkey. A further 1/3 are from sub-Saharan Africans, in particular West Africans. Analysis shows that North Africa and the East, even at an early time, were part of one since region, without much of a genetic barrier between them. Clearly, human populations were interacting with many more groups from many further areas and distances than were previously assumed. It is part of the African continent, but the Sahara Desert presents substantial barrier to travel from southern regions. So these ancient people appear to be related to Middle Easterns and share, like I said, about 2/3 of their genetic ancestry with the Nufians, the hunter-gatherers who lived in the Middle East from about 14,500 to 11,000 years ago. And 1/3 are from sub-Saharan Africa, most likely today's West Africans, the Hazai and Tanzania. There exists, in a sense, during this phase, IB1 of the final Nufians, a very strong link between the living and their dead being grouped together in a common space. This feeling reinforces by the fact that some of the dead were disposed directly on structures or on the floor without preliminary digging of pits. And such evidence was never clearly shown in the early or the late Nufian, except for a few exceptions. Burial practice, always regarded as being close to proximity to, but not commingled with, inhabitation space. This commingling of burial and living spaces appears all the more remarkable because all of the graves from the previous period at Malalata were grouped together in a well-defined zone remote from the houses. The custom of grouping graves shows a long-term continuity, probably over several generations, and the term of cemetery seems fully justified in this context. Thus, the final Nufian marks a organization of funerary practices when compared to late Nufian. More of the primary burials were also single ones. About 15,000 years ago is the oldest known cemetery in the world. People buried there are dead and sitting in a sense, sitting positions with heads and animal horns deep in a cave in what is now Morocco. These people were also found with small, sophisticated stone arrowheads and points. And archaeologists assume that they were part of an advanced European culture that had migrated across the Mediterranean Sea to North Africa. But now their ancient DNA, the older Africans show that these people had, in a sense, no European ancestry. Instead, they were related to the Middle Easterners and the Sub-Saharan Africans, suggesting that more people were migrating in and out of North Africa than had previously been believed. DNA M215 carrying men directly from North Africa to southwest Europe via a maritime route. Nubian skeleton remains from ancient Levant predominantly carried a Y-DNA haplogroup E1b1. Of the 5 Nubian specimens studied, their lineages belong to the EB1, B1, B2, and a few other haplogroups at about 60%. It also has EB1B1 in moderate frequencies, which are found in the pre-pottery Neolithic B culture. E1B1B1 and E1B1B2 observed in 2 of the 7 specimens from the pre-pottery Neolithic B sediments at about almost 30%. The scientists suggest that the Levantine early farmers may have spread southward into East Africa, bringing along West Eurasian and Basal Eurasian ancestry components separate from that which would have arrived later in North Africa. And no affinity with the Nubians to sub-Saharan Africans. Additionally, E1B1B1 has been found in Egyptian mummies excavated at Abul-Sur el-Meleku in the Middle Egypt, which dates from a period between the late New Kingdom and the Roman era. Fossils at the site in Morocco, which have been dated to around 7,000 years ago, also carried hologroup type E1B1B1B1A subglade. These ancient individuals bore a genetic component that peaks among North Africans, indicating that they were ancestral to populations in the area. The clad-bearing individuals that were analyzed from DNA at the Tenerife site, with specimens found DNA from 7 ancient individuals at Grota des Pigeons near Tafarat in eastern Morocco. The fossils were directly dated to 15,100 to 13,900 years before present. The scientists found that 5 male specimens DNA belonged to E1B1B1A1, with one skeleton bearing a different E1 lineage. In Africa, EM215 is distributed highest frequency in the Horn of Africa and North Africa, where it was recent millennia expansion as far as South Africa and northwards to Western Asia and Europe, especially in the Mediterranean and the Balkans. Almost all EM215 men, also in EM35, was found, M215 was found to be older than M35, when individuals were found also to have the M215 mutation, but do not have a M35 one. One individual from northern Iran was found to be positive for this M25, but negative for M35. EM215 and EM35 are quite common in Afro-Asiatic speakers. The linguistic group carried by EM35 lineage have high probability to come from Afro-Asiatic. Among populations of Afro-Asiatic speaking history, a significant portion of Jewish male lineages, the EM35, which accounts for approximately 18% to 20% of Ashkenazi, and from 8.6 to 30% of Y chromosomes appear to be the major founding lineages of the Jewish population. Paganism, as such, that is seen in Turkey around 12,000 years ago. Hologroup G2A and the development of early agriculture seem to be connected. Hologroup G descends from Hologroup F, which is thought to represent the major migrations of Homo sapiens out of Africa, at least 60,000 years ago. Hologroup G has 303 mutations, confirming a severe bottleneck before splitting to hologroups G1 and G2. G1 might have originated around modern-day Iran, around 26,000 years ago. G2 would have developed around the same time in West Asia, probably Turkey. And hologroup G2 appear to have been closely linked in the development of early agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, sometime around 11,500 years ago. G2A branch expanded to Anatolia, to the Cossacks, or so Turkey and the Cossacks, and Europe, while G2B diffused from Iran across the Fertile Crescent and east to Pakistan. There has so far been ancient Y DNA analysis from early Neolithic Anatolia, Turkey, Iran, Israel, Jordan, as well as the Neolithic cultures in Europe, such as the Neolithic Greece, the Serbo culture in Hungary and Croatia, the black pottery culture in Germany. Anyways, from different sites yield a majority of G2A individuals, except those from the Levant. This strongly suggests that farming was disseminated by members of Hologroup G, at least from Turkey and Iran, then moved to Europe. 44 ancient Near East samples, including Neolithic farmers from Jordan, Western Iran, and are found a G2B sample dating to pre-pottery Neolithic around 9,250 years ago, and G2A1 from early pottery Neolithic around 7,700 years ago, both found in Iran. The highest genetic diversity within Hologroup G is found in the northern part of the Fertile Crescent, between the Levant and the Cossacks, which would be a good indicator for its origin. Çatalhöyük in south-central Anatolia, Turkey, was founded by farmers who had brought domesticated goats and sheep. Also, about 8,500 years ago, G2A Neolithic farmers arrived in the northwest Turkey and Greece and central Greece. As attested by ancient genomes around that time, as seen in cattle domestication, it was introduced to. First at sites like Çatalhöyük in central Turkey, presumably by trading with their eastern neighbors. Ancient skeletons from the Star-Croso-Chris culture around 8,000 to 6,500 years ago in Hungary and Croatia, and the linear pottery culture 7,500 years ago and 6,500 years ago in Hungary and Germany, all confirmed that G2A, both G2A2A and G2A2B, remain the principal perennial lineage even after farmers had immigrated with the indigenous populations, as they had advanced their Neolithic revolution. And G2A farmers from Greece in the Neolithic quickly expanded across the Balkans, reaching Serbia, Hungary, Romania by around 7,800 years ago, and Germany by around 7,500 years ago, Belgium and northern France by 7,200 years ago. And going back a bit, by 7,800 years ago, farmers were making pottery and had, in a sense, arrived at the northwest coast of Turkey and already had brought pigs. These people crossed the Aegean by boat and colonized the Italian peninsula and the Iridium coast, southern France, Iberia, where they established this new pottery culture around 7,000 years ago to 3,500 years ago. Once again, ancient DNA yields a majority of G2A samples in the Cardamom pottery culture, with G2A frequencies above 80%, against the 50% in Central and Southern or Southeastern Europe. Nevertheless, subsequent minorities of other halogroups have also been found on different Neolithic sites, next to the G2A majorities, such as C1, A2, H2, I, I2A1, I2C, and J2A in Turkey. C1A2 and EM78, H2, I1, I2A, I2A1, J2, and T1A in the southern and central Europe, such as the Star Curvo, the Sopot, the Lydiar black pottery, as well as EV13, H2, A1, I2A, 2A1, and R1B, V88 in Western Europe. Cauldron pottery in the Mesolithic. H2 and T1A were found in in the pre-pottery Neolithic Levant, and are undeniably linked to earlier development of agriculture alongside G2A. That being said, the C1A2 was also found in Mesolithic Spain, and as it is an extremely old lineage associated with the Paleolithic Europeans, it would also have been found all over Europe, in a sense, and Turkey before the Neolithic. E1B1B was also found in the pre-pottery Neolithic Levant, but the subglade may not be EM78 or EV13. Hologroup J and the spreading of early agriculture and pagan religion. Samples have been identified from various Neolithic sites, including linear pottery culture in Central Europe, and the cardamom pottery culture in southern France, megalithic cultures in northern Spain, and the funnel beaker culture in Germany and Sweden. All Neolithic samples tested to date belong to J1, J1C, or J2B1A. The question that follows is, did J1C and J2B1A lineages actually come from the Near East during the Neolithic, or whether they were already in the Balkans and just expanded out from there? Both being in a sense rare in the Near East today, the second hypothesis might seem convincing at first. However, the age of J2B1A has been estimated at 11,000 years ago before present, while the Neolithic started over 12,000 years ago in the Near East. In other words, it could have arrived from the Near East as J2B1 and developed into J2B1A only after reaching Europe, which would explain why this particular subglade is also exclusively European, while other subglades of J2B1 are mostly Middle Eastern or Eastern Mediterranean. J2B1A would therefore have come in a maternal lineage of early agriculturists along the paternal lineage of G2A. However, G1C is around 15,000 years ago. If it had been part of the Neolithic expansion from the Fertile Crescent, many G1C subglades would primarily in West Asia today, which isn't the case. The only J1C individuals are outside Europe, belonging to deep subclades that clearly originate in Europe or in Turkey. DNA from early Neolithic farmers from West Anatolia and from the Starkovo culture in Hungary and Croatia, and found that J1C was present in both cultures, alongside other typical European Neolithic lineages like H5, K1A, and N1A, and T2, and X2. There are, out of 44 ancient Near Eastern samples, including Neolithic farmers from Jordan and Western Iran, as well as from the Copper Age and the Bronze Age samples from Armenia and the Levant, but did not find any J1C, apart from a single individual in Neolithic Iran. This suggests that J1C lineages are probably not found among the very first farmers of the Fertile Crescent, but rather assimilated in neighboring populations further north, possibly in Turkey and Iran, but after also in the Balkans, which is connected to Turkey by a land bridge during the glacial and immediate post-glacial periods. Hologroup J has been found in Bronze Age samples from the Yama culture, which was J2B, the Cordware culture, which was J1C, and J2B1A. The Catcomb culture was J1B1A1, and the Untitled culture was J1B1A1, and the unified culture of J1B1, all in Central Europe. And the Cordware culture is associated with the expansion of the Y hologroup R1A from northern Russia steppes, and the continuity with the Neolithic samples from Central Europe. It can be assumed that J1C and J2B1A maternal lineages were not brought by the newcomers, but absorbed by male invaders. On the other hand, J1B has never been found in Europe before the Bronze Age, and was very probably brought there by Indo-Europeans carrying R1B paternal lineages, both from the Untitled and the Unify culture, were brought to have been and thought to be founded mainly by R1B men. So I think that general three realms of the goddesses, in a sense, types of goddesses: air goddesses like the sky, and kind of full, fat goddesses like the earth or whatever. And then the other goddesses, the thinner ones, is relating to afterlife or whatever. And I think that it's, in general, that I surmise that there's an expression of goddess representation that relves to the three realms in a sense of belief. The above realm, the heavens, the earth we live in, humanity lives in, and then the underworld, the dead, like ghosts and demons. And it and I think that a lot of times we forget, like, the populations that moved around and the people that they and then influenced, is a lot broader and expansive than we would think of today. Because when we think about today, we think about, going, 5-10 miles, probably from our general area on a general, way of how we live. But to me, people would do that much and more just to go hunting. And they would go, even farther to get things like, obsidian or whatever. So the travel was a lot more expansive in these earlier times than, we think of today, because we think that a person, 1,000 miles away couldn't have had any possible interaction, and they may have. And it also is important because you have this long trade networks or traveling migrations of ideas and people. You have a lot of intermingling, which I think, like the paganism itself, I think people from the Cossacks, from Iran, from Turkey's ideas, you have people that were living in Egypt. And then I think you have influx of these two things merging together, in a sense, to come up with a new idea, which is still taking from the old ideas. And Europe and the Middle East, between about 10,000 years ago till 8,000 years ago, is, in a sense, agriculture, cattle herding. And then later there's pottery is developed in the Near East, around this period. Technologies, first arrived to Europe for farming, and the whole region, it starts to change and adapt to these new cultures, and these new culture ideas carry with them religious ideas, in a sense. It's not like someone just gives you a bag of seeds and you just go plant. It's this whole concept that why you plant, why you water, why you, do a certain thing. So the behaviors are being, in a sense, duplicated, even though, because it's paganism, in a sense, spreads out into a large part of Europe. It does. I'm not saying that every single culture is the same. Certainly, as politically, they would be very much, could be at odds with each other. But as far as the religious ideas, I think there's a template kind of for these ideas, and then they adapt them to regional variants of what's it like in their area. I mean, you can't have a mountain god in a place where there's no mountains. You can't have in a sense, a water god if you're landlocked in a desert. I mean, it so I think that they just adapt. It's like the fact of hunters, they start out being mammoth hunters, and all of a sudden they hit California and they start fishing a lot more. And same with over there in Japan. And speaking of understanding behaviors and the spread of people, I think you can really see that in a sense, the mounds of snail shells that were being, used. And it's not just in France. There's huge snail mounds are found all over, from North Africa, and other areas. So these refuse piles, in a sense, for the shells of the, in a sense, are already eaten, but it's the fact of the stacking them and just a kind of a ritual nature of it. And the oldest of these starts out about 10,000 years ago. And the approximate location for some of these sites are from 10,000 years ago till roughly 7,000 years ago to 5,000 years ago. And it curtails mainly, the region of the Caspian, but also parts of southern, in a sense, France. And to me, we see another, or the first, which I would consider kind of real sitting goddesses, from Shar Yar Halagun, a 10,000-year-old figure from Israel. And Neolithic, it's a stylized figure. And I think it's definitely part of this emerging goddess cult of agriculture, civilization, and religion. And this Neolithic site that it was found at is one of the most important and largest in Israel at the time. And this Venus was made out of clay and assembled, in a sense, looks like a few parts or into parts. And it's part of the Yamarukan culture and the Neolithic culture of ancient Levant or Israel. It was the first culture, in a sense, of prehistoric Israel, sort of, and one of the oldest in the Levant to make use of pottery. This culture derives from the Yarmouk River, which flows near this type of site, and it's at the foot, in a sense, of the Golan Heights. And this culture was a pottery Neolithic culture that inhabited parts of Israel and Jordan. The site is dated from around 8,400 to 8,000 years ago in general, and is located in the central Jordan Valley and the northern banks of the Yarmouk River. Its size is around 20 hectares, making it one of the largest settlements in the world at that time, and probably indicating that its role in the area as a center. And exotic objects were discovered there during excavations, including shells from the Mediterranean, polished stone vessels of alabaster or marble, and blades made from obsidian that's found in Turkey. The presence of obsidian from Turkey points to trade connections seeming to extend possibly 435 miles away. At the time of gradual location among the banks of the river near Jordan, early early pottery Neolithic period dating from 8,400 to 7,000 years ago. Among the outstanding objects found at Shar Yar Hagolan in Israel were figurines in a human form, made of fired clay and carved, in a sense, on pebbles. The overwhelming majority of these images are female, interpreted as representing a goddess. The clay figures are extravagant in their detail, giving this surrealistic appearance or stylistic appearance, while the pebble figures are seemingly minimalist and of a real abstract form. Blades from that site and other sites for this culture have been identified in Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon, and include Tel Megiddo in Israel, Tel Kerba in Israel, Anna Galauza in Jordan, Munu Hana in Israel, Tel Queshish in Israel, Hamadia in Israel, Ina Rahab in Jordan, Abu Tasawab in Jordan, Bablos in Lebanon. Although this culture occupied limited regions in northern Israel and northern Jordan, this culture's pottery has been found elsewhere in the region, including excavations at Bablos in Lebanon. The first goddess? Well, the sitting goddess on a throne, I would definitely say to me has to be from Çatalhöyük, has to be considered possibly one of the first goddesses, if not the one found in Israel, also sitting close to or a similar time. And the one Sibla or Sibyl later is known as the Great Mother, the Mountain Mother from Turkey. And the figure on the throne is a female figure and was made probably sometime after 10,000 years ago to 9,500 years ago. Similar figures have been found in Greece, sitting on thrones with lions, and from Italy, and from Spain. And this reminds me of this is Çatalhöyük, and to me everywhere in a sense that the J DNA or the GA DNA kind of spread with this early agricultural paganism, to me that there's a connection, it seems, to the ideas of goddess and the bull. And in fact, there's a book called The Goddess and the Bull, and talking about Çatalhöyük. The Goddess and the Bull book details the dramatic quest by an archaeologist to unearth buried secrets of human cultural evolution and its huge, spectacularly well-preserved 9,500-year-old village in Turkey, Çatalhöyük. A site at the origins of what is believed to be modern society and the dawn of art, agriculture, religion, and family structure, and even the first, in a sense, tangible evidence of human self-awareness, the world's oldest mirrors. Some archaeologists have claimed that the mother goddess was the first worshipped at places like Çatalhöyük. The excavations there have yielded the seeds of what seems to be the Neolithic revolution, when prehistoric humans first abandoned the hunter-gatherer life, as they had previously known, and started inventing farming and began living in houses and shared communities. And this also, to me, relates to the lion throne goddesses of West Asia. The goddesses on a lion throne are abundantly attested in the archaeological things of representations in the Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Canaan, Israel. First, we'll look at also in the things like the Phoenician scarab, references that show lion thrones, and often they're winged in a sense, lions. And then there's actual thrones that are close to this idea in ancient Lebanon. Canaanite winged sphinxes, and in a sense effigies to Asheret enthroned with winged lionesses. This leads to, in a sense, the understanding that on, strong biblical parallels, this lion belief, is connected. Like they believe, that in a sense, the Lion of Judah. I think it goes back to the same thing, it's just a thunder, like a sky god. And there is some Hellenized forms of Antnolan or Turkish lion throne goddesses as well. And there's a sitting goddess from Halcyon that is from Turkey. It's 9,000 years old, and it's in southwestern Turkey. And it's generally called a mother goddess, and is made of clay. And it has been noted that it has, in a sense, a continuation of the Halcyon goddess figures from the tradition advanced westward from Çatalhöyük. This figure is also a variance on the sitting goddess position. And called a mother goddess because of the fact that she's large, and the sitting posture could reference giving birth. Numerous nude female figures are made there in Çatalhöyük, and represent probably some divinity. Ceramics from Halcyon showed similarities to also the Haffa culture from about the same period. There also seems to be similarities in their figurines as well. At the level of 7,300 years ago, the village was fortified and had then a small temple. The settlement level 1, dating to 7,000 years ago, differs significantly from the previous layers. It is also believed that there were newcomers who settled there. The site is then heavily fortified. The pottery is of high quality and generally painted red on in a sense, cream background. Sumerian first goddess Namu, from it probably stems from the Ubinians about 8,500 years ago to 5,800 years ago. Namu was the goddess, the sea, in a sense, became Inker and gave birth to An, the heavens, and Ki, the earth, and the first gods of the Sumerian religion. Namu is not attested well, though, in Sumerian mythology. She may have been of greater importance in prehistory, before Enki took over most of her functions. An indication of her continued relevance, though, may be found in the name of Ur-Nammu, the founder of the third dynasty of Ur. The Eubatians, though never were mentioned in a sense by the Sumerians themselves, and are assumed by modern scholars to have been the first civilizing force of Sumer. They, in a sense, drained the marshes and made them ready for agriculture, developed trade, established industries, including weaving, leatherwork, metalwork, masonry, and pottery. Some scholars think that Sumerian language originally may have been that of hunting and fishing peoples who lived in the marshlands of eastern Arabia region, and were part of the cultural bi-faced culture, though they had probably other influences. The term Sumerian is common name given to ancient non-Semitic speaking inhabitants of Mesopotamia by the East Semitic speaking Akkadians. The Sumerians referred to themselves as the black-headed people, and to their land as the place of the noble lords. Proto-writing and in the prehistory dates back to the earliest texts in the cities of Uruk and Jembet Nebzer, and dates to around 5,300 years ago. Early cruciform script emerged in around 5,000 years ago. The Sumerian civilization took from the Uruk period, about 6,000 years ago to 5,000 years ago, continuing on until the early diagnostic periods. During the third millennium, after 5,000 years ago, a close cultural symbiosis developed between the Sumerians, who spoke a language isolate, and the Akkadians, which gave rise to widespread bilingualism. The influence of the Sumerian and Akkadian, and vice versa, is evident in all areas, from lexical borrowing on a massive scale to syntax and monophonical convergence. In the Neolithic, clay amulets have been found that could also be a kind of proto-writing, part of the Tara-Terran tablet set, dated to about 7,500 years ago till 7,300 years ago, and is associated with the Tardras Vinnic culture. The Vinnic symbolism on it predates the Proto-Sumerian script, pictographic script. The Vinnic culture that flourished from about 8,000 to 6,000 years ago was named the Vinnic Tardras culture of Yangolesava and western Romania, and derived its name from the village of Vinnic, located in the banks of the Danube River, 14 kilometers downstream from Belgrade. Another part of the Vinnic legacy are curious masks, and the information on what seems to be figures depicting women in extremely modern type clothes, with narrow skirts and sleeveless upper bodies. Panels are, in a sense, also hip belts and aprons and jewelry and formed shoes and caps and hairstyles that vary, and bracelets and necklaces and medallions. Archaeological data shows that the Neolithic expansion from Turkey was not a single event, but was represented by several waves of migrants. In this respect, the Proto-Secolo culture in Greece, from which directly the Star Syro-Chris culture in the northern Balkans, and indirectly the linear black pottery from Central Europe, originate, and represents only, in a sense, the first of great waves of Neolithization of Europe. A later great wave of migration from northwest Turkey led to important culture of southeastern Europe, such as the Vinnic and the Botanic culture, Secondly, there is a total absence of a DNA from Southeast Europe in the current models. The mtDNA variability from 63 individuals recovered from 10 archaeological sites in Romania, spanning a period of 5,500 years, starting around 8,300 years ago, and in Romania. This is a strategic area of southeastern Europe from which different prehistoric human groups have passed and later spread out through Europe. Early Neolithic Star Servo-Chris culture, the mDNA variability observed from samples in early Neolithic Romania, such as hologroup H, HV, J, and T1A. Hologroup H is most frequent in present-day European population, and the hologroup J and T1 are suggested as markers of the Neolithic diffusion from the Near East, such as Turkey. The remains of oldest Neolithic civilization in Europe lies, it seems, in the Vinnic culture. The largest Neolithic settlement in Europe, dating back more than 7,000 years ago. Considered to have been a center for civilization and spread across the territory of Bosnia, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Greece. The archaeological sites in Vinica reveal different kinds of tools and weapons made from stone blades, pottery, ritual vessels, jewelry, and numerous anthropomorphic, human-like, and zoomorphic, animal-like figures. The remains of prehistoric houses and many other objects crafted there have brought from remote areas. What makes this site so unique is a large number of identical objects, indicating that people had some kind of a standardized production this late into the age. They wove dresses with V-necks with certain styles and designs. They had furniture in their houses. They had created beautiful pottery. In addition, they also seemed to love to travel. They would travel to the Carpathians in order to get volcanic glass obsidian to use for their weapons. And they bought different objects from as far land as in different cultures. That is why the Vinica culture is considered to be one of the most advanced prehistoric cultures by doing so. Copper, though, the Copper Age, before the Bronze Age, caused numerous wars and the disappearance of this Vinnic culture. While the people were in a sense, made their fortunes making jewelry, tools out of copper, others used it more to make weapons and then seized the treasures. As the people of the Vinnic were more peaceful civilization, this kind of led to their downfall. Among unearthed artifacts, there have been found a large number of figurines and other artifacts depicting worshipping of deities and women in miniskirts. It is hard to believe that women, in a sense, who lived several thousand years ago, wore things like miniskirts. Nonetheless, the cult of the mother goddess was widely spread and reached both southeastern part of Europe and including ancient India. Similar made trade between ceramic clay figures of mother goddesses were found in excavations in Mohenjo-daro, located in the Indus River valley of ancient India and present-day Pakistan. This would mean that women wore, in a sense, these modern type of clothing 7,500 years ago, at least. The Vinica culture of Europe's biggest prehistoric civilization points to a metropolis with a great degree of sophistication and a growing taste for art and fashion. Halciar is an early human settlement in southwestern Turkey, and it has a sitting goddess who is dated from around 8,000 years ago to 7,500 years ago, of unbaked clay, and it's a female figure. It's called the Mistress of Animals. She's clutching what appears to be, or believed to be, a leopard cub, and she's sitting on what appears to be a leopard. Halciar is the Turkish name for an important Neolithic site in Turkey. Several significant artifacts from this site are displayed in the Museum of Anatolia, Turkey. Ceramics from Halciar show similarities with the Haffa culture from about the same period. There are similarities in figurines, and it also connects the origin of Europeans' first farmers, their role of Halcyon in Western Turkey. Discoveries in Western Turkey have shed light on the origins of Europeans' first farmers. Early Neolithic communities in Greece and the Balkans shared a common ancestry in Western Turkey, at the site specifically of Halciar in Turkey. And a link provided a more complex and accurate picture of the spreading of farming to southeastern Europe. There could be, in a sense, seen as three geographical horizons, two mainly identified and one as tentative, but each characterized by different, in a sense, Neolithic package and repeated migrations from central Turkey plateau and further from the Levant, probably spread farming into Europe. The second half sometime after 9,000 years ago. Vinica also has sitting goddesses. Vinican figures like this were found of seeming women sitting, and they're about 7,400 to 6,700 years ago. The Hamminga culture dated to around 7,250 to 6,500 years ago. To me, there's two figures. One is a female sitting on the ground, and one is a male sitting on a stool, and what appears to be his hands holding by his face. And both their mouths are open. The man's mouth is open more. I think this could represent sort of the goddess and the bull. Both their arms, you could almost say, could be different representations of bulls. One going with the hands up, being the sky god, in a sense, the bull, and the woman sitting down and, in a sense, arms inward, which is generally, to me, the mother goddess. And both, in a sense, though, could be, are almost seen like horns. But to me, that this is like just a representation of the ideas of goddess and the bull. But for now, the man is, to me, sitting on a little birthing stool. And so this could be, a representation not only of the male and female duality, but possibility of a god, emerging, sitting on a birthing stool to signify the male on the throne previously reserved for women. And I think also the bent arms of both, could possibly be metaphorical bullhorns. And the Hamagna culture began and was absorbed by expanding Botan culture since a tradition towards Gum Elamista. Its cultural links to Turkey suggest that it was the result of a settlement by people from Turkey, unlike neighboring cultures which appear to have descended from earlier Neolithic settlements. The Kunkuntri Tripilia culture of 7,200 years ago to 5,500 years ago in Eastern Europe has sitting goddesses on little thrones, and it's a culture of Romania and Ukraine, also known as the Tripoli culture of Russia, around 7,200 years ago to 5,000 years ago. It extended from Moldova as a center, covering substantial parts of western Ukraine and northeastern Romania. Surprisingly, even the swastika and yin and yang symbols can be found represented on some of the objects, which brings into question the origins of these symbols and their original meanings connected to early agricultural pagan religion. The roots of this culture can be found in the Star Servo-Christ culture and the Vinica cultures, with additional influence from the Bug Din Star culture from 8,500 years ago to 7,000 years ago. Limited but common historical lifetime between these cultures, such as the Triphylla culture of 6,800 years to 5,000 years ago, and the Yama culture of 5,300 years ago to 4,600 years ago. Given that the earliest archaeological finds of the Yamara culture are located in the Volga-Don basin, not in Dniester and Dnieper areas where the culture came in touch with the Yama culture into its, in a sense, full extension on the Pontic steppe, and early around 5,000 years ago. At the time, the Kukuturi Triphylla culture ended, thus indicating an extremely short survival after coming in contact with the Yama culture. Another seemingly indication is that the kurgans that replaced the traditional horizontal graves in the area containing human remains are fairly diversified skeletal types, taller on average than previous population. Earlier societies of hunter-gatherer tribes had no social stratification like the later societies of the Bronze Age, and noticeable social stratification, which saw the creation of occupational specializations, the state, and social classes of individuals who were elite ruling or religious classes, full-time warriors, and wealthy merchants, Also, those individuals at the other end of the economics spectrum who were poor, enslaved, or just generally lacked funds, thus hungry, or lacked ability. In between these two common models, the hunter-gatherer tribes and Bronze Age civilizations we find later in Neolithic, the societies such as the Kukuturi Triphylla culture, where the first indications of social stratification began to be found. However, it would be a mistake to overemphasize the impact of social stratification on this culture, since it was still, even in its later phases, very much egalitarian society, unlike the Yama. And of course, the social stratification was just one of many aspects of what was regarded as a fully established modern civilized society today, which began to appear in the Bronze Age. Like other Neolithic societies, this society had almost no division of labor, although its cultural settlements sometimes grew to become large, possibly the largest on Earth at the time, up to 15,000 people at its largest. There was no evidence that there had been discovered labor specializations. Every household probably had members of the extended family who would work in the fields, raise crop, go out in the woods or hunt for game, and bring back firewood and the like. And work, in a sense, out in the day and then bring it back at night. The Butmer culture existed in Bosnia and Herzegovina from 7,100 years ago to 6,500 years ago. And it also has, in a sense, the mother goddess figures. There is a figure that is on, it looks like a tricycle with ducks, and it appears to have the arms down but into the body, and have a large dress on, and then has what appears to be a bird head, whether it's a duck or another bird. To me, the whole fact of the birds or the ducks, I think, could relate to the breath of life, in a sense. The large nose, the ability to breathe. The Butmer culture existed dating from the Neolithic period. It's characterized by unique pottery, and certain characteristics of the pottery designs resemble the Minoans and the Kamar style. Some suggest a connection to the Minoan culture on Crete. Of course, this was during the same time that suggested Troy was found in Turkey. An overwhelming modern opinion is that these Butmer people were unique culture, possibly their own, in Sarajevo area, but seemingly having influences. And likely they also were an egalitarian society, with no evidence, it seems, of social stratification. Most animal remains found there belong to cattle. So the 7,000 years ago or so, there's basically only female figurines placed in graves in Egypt. I think this could relate to the nude goddess Nut. The sitting goddesses from Haifa 7,000 years ago in northern Syria border of Mesopotamia, and several styles of seated goddesses. The majority are painted with striped fashion, and one theory of why the seated position is expand the relations to childbirth, which likely is seen as sacred. Ultimately, it could connect to the Mesopotamian and goddess traditions, and one of the attributes of Iana seated on her throne, which does occur in many other figurines. Sitting goddesses of prehistoric religion of ancient Malta. Some goddess figurines have been found in Western Europe, but the yields have been much richer in sites like Egypt, the Levant, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, and the Balkans. And some of the most early and elaborate figures from these islands of Malta. In several images, human figures played an important role. These seeming fat ladies are associated with celebration of fertility, both human and agriculture. And there's a woman sitting on a stool, seemingly holding in a carrying way, holding a baby in her arms, and is part of the, I believe, is the goddess, sitting goddess phenomenon. And this figurine is of a woman in clay on a stool with an infant in her arms, and it's from Thessaly, Greece, and it's dated to about 6,800 to 6,500 years ago. DNA analysis of 6,500-year-old human remains in Israel points to origin of agriculture in connection with southern waves of migration from Anatolia, Turkey, and the Zagros Mountains in today's Turkey and Iran. After 10 years of research, they understand that Turkey, especially from the West, is part of the basic of all Europeans, matching how all European cattle are descended from Iranian cattle dispersed by farmer herders leaving Anatolia, Turkey. The Levant, which mainly refers to Israel in this sense in a common way use, but also includes Cyprus, Syria, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and the northern Sinai Peninsula as well. Movement of peoples from the Near East about 9,000 years ago, especially from Turkey, spreading early paganism as it went. By leapfrogging from island to island across the northern Mediterranean, Neolithic people were able to quickly spread their farming lifestyle across southern Europe. That's what genetics suggests. It seems that sometime after the individuals in the Near East first developed farming and herding around 12,000 years ago, they later transferred it and its new agricultural religion of early paganism out to many others. The genetic expression of the people from the Near East migrated into Turkey and then rapidly west through the islands of Greece and Sicily before making their way north into the center of the continent. People living in central Turkey today, for example, share DNA with Sicilians and Palestinians. But Sicilians and Palestinians have mutations that the two populations don't have in common. People have common ancestral roots in Turkey, but have not had much contact since. People even living around the Mediterranean today have common ancestors in Turkey. But then the gene diverged from two main divergent sets, with the Greek islands and Crete forming a sort of a genetic bridge to the rest of Greece, Sicily, Italy, and into Northern Europe. Genetics of modern-day Egyptians, Libyans, Tuscans, and Tunisians, and Moroccans form a separate genetic branch. Thus, the two distinct paths lacking much genetic mingling once they separated from northern and southern Turkey. However, there is some evidence, such as blades found in Neolithic settlements of Tunisia, that of volcanic glass that comes from isolated islands in Sicily. Agriculture and its new Neolithic religion of early paganism spread across the land through Central and Northern Europe at a rate of about half a mile a year, thus taking around a millennia to journey from the Balkans to Germany. But the Mediterranean was quite different, with these new pagan farmers jumping from island to island, getting from Italy all the way to Portugal in the space of just 6 generations. Archaeogenetic studies have described the formation of the Eurasian steppe ancestry as a mixture of Eastern and Caucasian hunter-gatherers. The horizon and cultural innovations at around 6,000 years ago and after that subsequently facilitated the advance of pastoral societies, likely linked to the dispersal of Indo-European languages, had some odd dispersals suggesting that the Cossacks acted as a bridge to human movement from the Yamana and subsequent pastoral cultures, and shows evidence for previously undetected Turkish farmers related to ancestry divergent contact zones with steppe Mayalop individuals harbor additional Upper Paleolithic Siberian and Native American related ancestry. So the genealogy of the Sumerio-Archaean gods, the first single goddess, Namu, is the oldest solo mother goddess. In Sumerian mythology, Namu also was a primeval goddess. It was associated with magic and corresponds to Tiamat in Babylonian mythology. Very little bit is known about Nama, who belongs to the oldest, in a sense, generation of Mesopotamian deities, and is associated with the pantheon of Eridu. She is mainly known for her role in cosmology and early Mesopotamian religion, and her importance in magic is attested, which is restricted to texts written in Sumerian. According to the Gods List, An Amum, Tablet 1, line 28, Nama bears the title Mother who gave birth to the heavens and the earth. Namu was the goddess sea, Inkur, that gave birth to An, heaven, and Ki, earth. The first gods representing Aspu, the freshwater ocean that the Sumerians believed lay beneath the earth, and the source of life-giving water and fertility in a country with almost no rainfall. Namu was not great importance at all times, but there probably had a greater importance prehistorically. in the thing of Namu and human creation story. And there's also Namu told the help of her son, and told to get help of her son, and she can create humans in the image of, most interesting, Namu as the only female prime mover to do this in the cosmic myths in antiquity. Namu is called the original mother who gave birth to the gods and the universe. Again, according her primary status among all the gods, and described her role in Mesopotamian cosmology. Later on, in particular Akkadian texts, Nama loses importance and is only rarely mentioned, aside from a few mentions in other mythological and literary texts about other gods. No mythology of this ancient goddess has fully survived. The Glacialin star, a mysterious 6,000-year-old mural from Jordan, seems to me to be very similar to the Ishtar-Ayana worshipped star of Ishtar, and sometime after 6,000 to 5,100 years ago. This mysterious star is a mural, in a sense, from Jordan. And I think it's a proto-star of Ishtar, or star of Ayana, or star of Vedas. Stars, in a sense, were at this time and before, were probably seen as ancestors. In a sense, spirits hanging in the sky, glowing. Spirit animals, and even later deities. And certainly by 6,000 years ago. Could a graviton carving that has a woman holding a bullhorn, about 25,000 years old, relate to this later idea of goddesses and bulls in cults like Çatalhöyük? I don't know, but it could. There's a long, to me, evolution of what finally becomes gods and goddesses. Confucianism's Tan, the Shanghai god, presumably is about 4,000 years old, maybe. And it seems to have supernaturalism, kind of a pantheism, or maybe even an early theism or monotheism. Single god religions, monotheism, which I tend to think of them as monotheism, as they seem to be no real single god religions that are female, and almost every religion that is male only and a single god, in a sense, is male. I think this relates to around 4,000 years ago, the great sky spirit, or / god Tan. I believe that it may be, to me, thus possibly connected to the Central Asian deity Tan, to also the related Tingri. Goddesses Ishtar Ayana were worshipped in Sumer at least as early as the Yuk period, sometime around 6,000 to 5,100 years ago. The Glacialin star, a mysterious star from Jordan, is found in a place where before, in a sense, people could write, or write before the emergence of writing. And they have figurines that were painted with black, brown, red, and yellow, just like the mural in a sense. And the painting, feature things like this: giant star, animals, and masked figures supporting what look like googly eyes. The Glacialin refers to a culture of archaeological stage dating to the Middle and Late Copper period. In the southern Levant, dating to about 6,400 years ago to 5,500 years ago. It's a typeset, in a sense, for other located in eastern Jordan Valley and north the edge of the Dead Sea in modern Jordan. The Glacial stage was characterized by small hamlet settlements and mixed farming peoples who had immigrated from the north and settled in the southern Levant, in today's Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. People of the Beersheba culture, a Glacial subculture, lived in underground dwellings, a unique phenomenon in the archaeological history of the region, or in houses that were trapezoid shaped and built of mud brick. The pottery was highly elaborate, including footed bowls and horn-shaped drinking goblets, indicating drinking of wine. Several samples display use of decoration, revealing that they may have painted the clay while it was still wet. In this Copper Age culture, before the Bronze Age, used stone tools but also smelted copper. Their funerary customs show evidence that they buried their dead in stone dolmens, and also practiced secondary funerary burial, kind of like seen in the skull cult earlier. Settlements belonging to the Glacial culture have been identified in numerous other sites in what is today southern Israel, especially in the region of Beersheba. Glacial culture correlates closely with the Armatan of Egypt, and also seems to have affiliates distinctive bird vases with early Minoan culture and Crete connections are possible. Between 5,800 and 5,350 years ago, this culture emerged, in a sense, based on economy specializing in smelting copper that Sumerian Yurk societies imported from the southern Levant and the upper Euphrates. The Glacians also erected dolmen monuments, similar to megalithic burial structures found only in Western Europe, but also in the Western Cossacks. An unexpected link to the Yurk to the Cossacks has been suggested for a cave of the treasure discovered in the Jordan Desert. The fine metalworking discovered in the desert in a period from 7,000 years ago to 5,500 years ago. And it has a bunch of cultural objects, possibly showing it might be a temple site that could have been even robbed during the Ubid-Yurk transition period. Adding to the archaeological mystery, the only comparable metalwork of this period has been discovered in the Mayklop burials north of the Black Sea. Archaeologists have suggested the Glacial contacts with the Aegean and Upper Egypt cultures suggest these Eastern Mediterranean copper smelters may have played a dynamic role connecting far-flung cultures. Notably, the Glacial culture featured the time and location some linguists have suggested for this Proto-Semitic language first emerged, which is approximately 5,700 years ago, probably in the Eastern Mediterranean. These later developments became the Eucratic and Phoenician and Hebrew languages, spoken not only in Canaan, but also throughout the Mediterranean, the Arabian Peninsula, and including the Horn of Africa. In Europe, this period was less favorable. The old European civilization dissolved between 5,500 years ago and 5,200 years ago, and regrouping near the Aegean Sea, in a sense. And some of the adapting new pastoral lifestyles near the Black Sea, such as the Cis-Taro culture, despite centrally in ancient Sumer, early Mesopotamians had rarely been discussed in the context of human genetic structure, and the effects of the Sumerian expansions in reshaping the world's genetic landscape remains to be fully discovered. However, the potential urban centers using this new technology toolkits, fueling population growth and giving these early, in a sense, advantage over the neighbors, suggesting that Sumer might have played a formative role also in Western Eurasia history. To establish a historical foundation for examining the multi-layered genetic structures of the Middle East, it has been done to outline three sort of phases in Sumerian civilization: founding the urban settlements during the Ubaid period, then the disperse of Sumerian populations to the Cossack Mountains, and Asia during the Yuk period, including related Kura-Arax migrations, popularly related to the spread of IE languages, or Indo-European languages, and back migrations to the Fertile Crescents in a response to events in the Sumerian world. During the Middle Bronze Age, Ubaid period, foundations from 8,500 to 5,800 years ago. The foundations of Sumerian civilization were laid, in a sense, during the Ubaid period. In this period, the first Mesopotamian cities were founded, starting with the world's first capital at Eridu, probably under the guidance of a priestly bureaucratic elite. These settlements, in a sense, were organized in a type of temperate heredity social structure, integrating farm laborers, nomadic pastoral animal herders, and hunting fishing peoples as all urban citizens. This urban culture spread outward, establishing a vast, in a sense, Ubaid horizon, approximately 2,000 kilometers across, between the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf. The flow of Ubaid material culture stimulated developments in more distant regions. In the northern Levant, the Ubaid civilization absorbed neighboring Haifa, dry farming, non-irrigation settlements, perhaps of Afro-Asiatic speaking predecessors of the Arcadians and the Syrians. Reaching even further beyond the rivers, the Ubaid related, like Hasyana and Samara, pottery types that have swastikas and seemingly female figures, and clay artwork have been found throughout the Aegean, Turkey, and the Eastern Mediterranean. And according to some archaeologists, these shared craft forms appeared simultaneously in southeastern Europe and in Western Asia around 8,700 years ago to 8,500 years ago. Map of Western Eurasian cultures during the Ubbid period. Sumer is, in a sense, the Ubbid heartland, is, in a sense, noticeable. Possible language families in neighboring areas are listed as possible shared connections. In Europe, and the Ubbid-related material culture was the basis for what's been dubbed as Old European civilization from the Balkans, Peninsula, and Central Europe, later splitting into local variants, traditions after around 7,000 years ago. More recently, has been documented evidence for a large, in a sense, Carpatho-Balkan metallurgy province, in a sense, composed of densely settled communities, possibly up to 15,000 people, connected by shared copper technology. This work of settlements flourished from about 7,500 years ago until 5,500 years ago, dissolving in a sense by 5,200 years ago. The Star of Ishtar and its connections, I think, to that older Galilean star, and also there's plaques that show upturned crescent moons, in a sense, not in a way that the moon actually would be, but I think the upturned portion of it is to reference this, like a sky deity. Sumerian goddess Iana, later called in Babylonian Ishtar, sometime after 6,000 years ago till 3,850. The goddess Iana appears in more myths than any other Sumerian deity. Many of her myths involve her taking over domains of other deities. Queen of Heaven title was given to a number of ancient sky goddesses worshipped throughout the ancient Mediterranean and Near East during these ancient times. Goddesses known to have been referred to by titles including Iana, Arat, Isis, Ishtar, and possibly Ashur by the prophet Jeremiah. In Greco-Roman times, Hera and her Roman aspect Juno bore this title. Forms and consent of worship or type of worship varied. In modern times, the title Queen of Heaven is sometimes used by contemporary pagans to refer to a great goddess, while Catholics and some Orthodoxy and some Anglican Christians now apply this ancient title of Queen of Heaven to the Mother of Jesus. Hathor was a major goddess in the ancient Egyptian religion who played a wide variety of roles. As a sky deity, she was the mother and consort to the sky god Horus and the sun god Ra, both whom were connected with kinship, and thus she was a symbolic mother to the earthly representatives and the pharaohs. She was one of the several goddesses who acted as the Eye of Ra, or Ra's feminine counterpart. And in this form, she had a vengeful aspect and that protected him from his enemies. Her contrasting beneficial side represented things like music, dance, joy, sexuality, and maternal care, and was connected also to the consort of several male deities and mothering of their sons. These two sides of this goddess exemplified the Egyptian connection of femininity. Hathor crossed the boundaries between worlds. I think this represents the bulls in general, like I said, going back to the moon. That there's crescent moon in a sense on two sides, the beginning as it's growing and as it's dying. And I think that that's in a sense, the two duality of the same person and seen in these goddesses. And it's two sides, like Hathor, also cross boundaries between worlds, it's believed, helping deceased souls in the transition to the afterlife. Hathor was often depicted as a cow, symbolizing her maternal and celestial aspects that are believed. Although most of her common form was a woman wearing a headdress of cow horns and a sun disk. She also could represent as a lioness, a cobra, or a sycamore tree. Cattle goddesses similar to Hathor were portrayed in Egyptian art from after 6,000 years ago, but she herself may not have appeared until the Old Kingdom, sometime around 4,686 years ago to 4,181 years ago. With the patronage of the Old Kingdom rulers, she became one of Egypt's most important deities. More temples were dedicated to her than many other goddesses, of which the most prominent was the Dendera temple in Upper Egypt. Isis also was depicted in a very similar way to Hathor, and Isis is depicted often as even nursing Horus, which shows there may be connection with these goddesses. Around, at least by around 4,700 years ago. To 2,700 years ago. Isis is treated as a mother of Horus, even in the earliest copies of the pyramid texts. Isis is also known for her magical powers. And as a sky goddess, many of her roles gave her, in a sense, an important position in the sky. Passages in the pyramid texts connect Isis closely with Sabdet, and the goddess representing the star Sirius, for those relationship with her husband Sa, the constellation Orion. Seeming evidence for a universal goddess. In Ptolemaic times, Isis' sphere of influence could include entire cosmos. As the deity that protected Egypt and endorsed its king, she had, in a sense, power over all nations. And as the provider of rain, she, in a sense, became part of the natural world. And one of the hymns calls her role of the sky, goes on to explain her authority. So in its climax, her domination encompasses the sky, the earth, and Duat. It says her power over nature, in a sense, nourishes the humans, and blesses the dead and other gods. Other Greek language hymns from this time of Egypt call her the beautiful essence of all the gods. In the course of Egyptian history, many deities, major and minor, have been described in similar grand terms. The goddess Mat is connected to the concept of truth, justice, law, integrity, uprightness, correctness, righteousness, steadfastness, reliability, order, stability, community, equilibrium, balance, measurement, reciprocity. And there is a thing that's has a lot of phrases close to what we find in the Ten Commandments. Also, you can hear some of that in the 42 principles of Mat, the Egyptian goddess of justice, dating to around 4,400 years ago. And it's about roughly at least 2,000 years before the Ten Commandments. The Sumerian Venus figurines of about 4,300 to 3,800 years ago from Mesopotamia. The first figurine in the sense of Anna sitting on a throne. She was a goddess who granted kingship. The other figurine is from Uruk. These would be representations of Anna, who was a very popular goddess. The hands on the breasts are a dead giveaway for a Venus figure in a sense. And I think that it relates to the fullness of the moon. And it is one of the indications in a sense of a great Mother Earth. And this posture became a standard across many cultures as the early Venus. There's also representations that show Egyptian goddesses, in a sense, sitting on thrones with the Sphinx and the scepter. And then you also have ones from Sicily that seem to represent almost the same thing, where many, in a sense, Venetian finds exhibit strong Egyptian influence. The goddess also holds a lotus scepter, often seen attributed to the Egyptian deity. And a scarab from Lebanon with a winged sun and a star of Asher, the planet Venus. And mirrors a similar one from the Phoenicians that seems to possibly represent the planet Venus and a goddess sitting on a lion throne with a scepter in front of her. So there seems to be, also this connection or diffusion or transfer or shared similarities between different languages and also the religions that those languages, were originally connected to. And Egyptian society, in a sense, starts off with the king, pharaoh, priest at top, and then, is a social hierarchy below that with the priests and nobles, and then the soldiers, and then scribes, and then merchants, and then craftspeople, and then just commoners, and then below that slaves. Very, very similar to what the Mesopotamian hierarchy follows. And both of them seem to mix religion with government and culture at some time around or after 5,000 years ago. And the ancient crypto art refers to all works originating from Cyprus, at least by beginning 12,000 years ago. Seasonal hunters came. The first Neolithic settlers from Cyprus originated from either Syro-Palestine coast or southern Turkey. Farming communities founded on agriculture, probably containing this early paganism. It was toward the end of the Neolithic period when these people began to bake clay into vessels which were frequently established with abstract designs. During this period, a flood of Syro-Palestinian and Turkish migrants were introduced, more advanced culture where the religion was practiced and art proceeded and became more complex. Examples of such art of female figures formed in clay or stone resemble fertility, or one of the cultural values of agrarian societies at the time. Middle Bronze Age, 3,900 years ago to 3,650 years ago, contact with Egypt, the Near East, the Minoan Crete, and the Mycenaean Greek occurs. Despite the continuation of agriculture, certain developments such as diffusion of burial procedures and building of unique religious installations and the use of seals indicates a more sophisticated and organized society emerging. The Crypto-Minoan script in regular usage of the island of Cyprus and the merchants of cryptid that went overseas traveling during this late Bronze Age. Although still undeciphered, the signs and unique inscribed and miniature copper oxhide ingots are associated with clay tablets that may hold a clue to their purpose. The ingots were previously seen as religious offerings inscribed with dictations or dedications. And it is suggested these instead, because of their extremely pure copper, were produced in a sense as commercial samples and were marked with a brand denoting high quality of the province. So a cryptic terracotta female figure seems to be a style that occurs in many places of having large ears and earrings. About 3,450 to 3,050 years ago. From the cryptic culture of Cyprus, these bird-like faces, which I think could relate to the breath of life, the ears pierced twice, and a hoop earring in one of the holes. And to me, this probably comes from the Syrian Turkish peoples that came to Cyprus about 4,400 years ago, identified in a sense with the Phila culture found in most parts of the island. The figure is typical like those in a sense of a Syrian Turkish origin. But as all areas, that they can take their sculptors and make their own variations. Ring-eared, Dumbo-like appearance, oversized ears were pierced for, in a sense, these ceramic carvings. The face was pinched in a Syro-Halfin style, and some people perceive as bird-like. The styled circles are seen around the Black and Caspian seas. And like the large loop, possibly these goddesses had their ears pierced as some form of sacrifice, which was a huge part of religious culture at the time, and people may have practiced this as well. Some of these figurines have smaller holes than the Cyprus or Syrian idols tend to. Sometimes they had many perforations. These holes seem to suggest some sort of extended symbolism, maybe not yet understood. In some case, they could stand a lone feature of the figure. They are seemingly too small to tell. It is uncommon to see small pictures. It is not uncommon to see a small picture at the side of the hip, at the breast area, or at a location about the body. In the end, it could simply be decorative, indicating textiles, but it could also be some other type of a thing. And their dispersals can be found in Turkmenistan, Syria, Cyprus, Bulgaria, Ukraine, with similar features. Historically, the Jewish religion had elements of polytheism, especially the worship of goddesses and a cult of the mother goddess. Asher was identified as the queen consort of the Sumerian god Anu, the Eucratic El, and the oldest deities of their respective pantheons, as well as Yahweh, the God of Israel and Judah. This role gave her a similarly high ranking in the Eucratic pantheon. Despite her association with Yahweh, in extra biblical sources, Deuteronomy 12 has Yahweh commanding the destruction of her shrine so that to maintain purity of his worship, showing the two were being worshipped together. Like Eleth means means goddess. It clearly associated with Asher in the Phoenician history because of the common name Ephathat. The goddess par excellence was used to describe her in Eucratic. The book of Jeremiah, written about 2,628 years ago, possibly refers to Asher when it describes his title of Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah 7:16 through 18 and Jeremiah 44:17 through 19. Asher, in ancient Semitic religion, is a mother goddess who appears in a number of ancient sources. She appears in Akkadian writings by the name Ashurt, and in Hittites as Ashrub or Ashurt. Asher is generally considered identical with the Eucratic goddess Atarat. She is also called Eltat, goddess, the feminine form of El, compared to Alat, and Quisosh for holiness. Atarat in Akkadian texts appears as Asherum, the wife of Anu, the god of heaven. In contrast, Asherat is believed to be linked to the Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar, who is sometimes portrayed as the daughter of Anu, while in the Eucratic myth, Asherat is one of the daughters of El, the Western Semitic counterpart of Anu. Among the Hittites, this goddess appears as Ashrud and Ashut, the consort of Elkhumsera, El of the creator of the earth, and the mother of either 77 or 88 sons. Among the Amarna letters, a king of the Amorites is named as Abodi Asherah, servant of Asher. William Denver, professor at the University of Arizona, has investigated archaeology in the Near East for more than 30 years and authored almost as many books on the subject. In the following describes how most significant archaeological finds related to the Hebrew Bible, including his own hot-button discovery of the Israelites' God was linked to a female goddess called Asher. Yes, Israelites once worshipped a goddess and a god. Thousands of clay figurines, like the one shown, suggest that early Israeli or Hebrew worship more than a single god. The idea of single god brings me back to the idea of the Asian deity Tan. Here we see Chinese bronze script character for Tan. This literally meaning the heavens. Tan is one of the oldest Chinese terms for heaven and is a key concept in Chinese mythology, philosophy, and religion. It is also seen in oracle bone script. Oracle bone script in Chinese is pieces of turtle shell or bone, and normally that of an ox, scapula or turtle pieces, which were used in a sense for divination in ancient China. Mainly during the late Shang dynasty, the oracle bones bear the earliest known significant corpus of ancient Chinese writing, contain important historical information such as royal genealogy of the Shanghai dynasty. When they were deciphered in early 20th century, the records confirmed the existence of the Shang, which some scholars until then had disputed. Tang is one of the oldest Chinese terms of heaven. In Taoist and Confucianism, Tan, the celestial aspect of the cosmos, often translated as heaven, is mentioned in relation to complementary aspects of Di, often translated as earth. These two aspects in Taoist cosmology are represented in a dualistic nature, of Taoism. They are thought to maintain the two poles of the three realms of reality. The middle realm occupied by humanity, the lower realm occupied by demons and ghosts. First, Shang meaning high, highest, first, primordial, second, Di, typically considered the short form of Hang Di. In modern Chinese, the title of the Emperor of China, first employed by Qin Shi Huang, and is usually translated as emperor. The word itself is derived from 3 Hung and 5 Ding, including Yellow Emperor, the mythological originator of the Chinese civilization, and the ancestor of the Chinese race. It refers also to the High Shang God, thus meaning deity, manifestation of God. And thus the name Shang Di should be translated as highest deity, but also have the imparted meaning of primordial or first deity in classical Chinese. The deity prescribed the title of emperors to China and named after the role of the sons of heaven. In the classical text, the highest conception of the heavens is frequently identified with Shang Di, who is described somewhat anthropomorphically. He is associated with the pole star, and the connections of the supreme ruler of Shang Di and the sublime heavens afterwards correlates and absorb each other. The earliest references of Shang are found in oracle bone inscriptions around 4,000 years ago. Shang Di is Emperor Shang is believed before the Xia dynasty. Shang Di was a romanticization of two Chinese characters in modern Chinese. Under Shang Di or later names, the deity received sacrifices from the rulers of China. In every Chinese dynasty, annually, at a great temple of heaven in the imperial capital, following the principles of the Chinese geometry, they would be located in the southern quarter of the city. During the ritual, a completely healthy bull would be slaughtered and presented as an animalist sacrifice to Shang Di. It is important to note that Shang Di never represented as either images or idols. Instead, the center building of the Temple of Heaven is structured called the Imperial Vault of Heaven, a spirit table inscribed with names of Shang Di is stored on the throne. During annual sacrifice, the emperor would carry these tablets to the north of the Temple of Heaven, a place called the Prayer Hall for Good Harvest, and place them on a throne. It was during the Ming and Qing dynasties when Roman Catholicism was introduced, and that the idea of Shang Di started to be applied to the Christian conception of God. While initially utilizing the transition from Shang Di was contested by Confucians, as they believed that the concept of Tan and Shang Di is different from the Christian God. Humans seem, though, to have a need to mythicize. It is interesting how many people act like there is only one God myth in the world, that they must not have realized the concept is more varied than just what they think of as human related, connected to races or types of people on the earth. Throughout history and prehistory, humans have ascribed various powers to supernatural beings. Such creatures included immortal gods and goddesses. Humans seem to have a need to mythicize the world around them. I believe it helps them feel like they have control and thus safety. people have worshipped somewhere at least of like almost 4,000 beings, if not many more. Some of giving credit to the creation of the world and mankind, or food, or warfare, or love, and all other good and bad elements that we find in life. Yet even mythicizing believers can be pretty sure most of these were simply invented, as they generally don't believe all of them. However, such believers are generally sure that their specific chosen mythology, gods, religion beliefs are somehow real, while the gods and religions of others, those ones they believe, are false. To me, they're all false. What evidence do they have for this belief that theirs is right and others are false? Once it is challenged, mythicizing believers have no evidence to offer in reality, though it seems not to faze them at all, that they too have just evidence of reality, not their evidenceless gods that are contrary to reality. And this reality contrary faith in their immortal gods, goddesses, supernatural beings and powers as something that they see as real, when they're really just a different chosen methodological assumption of mythical beliefs. They see the face of God because they have fear. They have the need to control, and thus the psychological safety mechanism that there's somehow an ability to control things, and thus a God becomes, in a sense, desirable to such people. So why do they believe that there is this need to mythicize with such passion and obviously such blind abandon? Possibly the inclusion of the mythicizing belief as a function of their family or cultural capital, not really built of something of evidence. We can all see that religion follows these families of connected ideas, and they don't have a purpose other than we give them. There are turtle shells with writing in Neolithic graves in central China that may, in a sense, hold, the world's earliest writing as signs carved into these 8,600-year-old tortoise shells. And could also connect to the involvement of shamanistic rattle. Tortoise shells were found in 24 Neolithic graves excavated in northern China. According to some archaeologists, the symbols carved in the shell had similarities to the oracle bone script at 3,200 years ago, which may show it's a form of Chinese characters that later inspires or is used in the oracle bones. In Mesopotamia, in ancient times, the turtle was associated with the god Enki and was used as one of the symbols of Enki. In the myth, where there's a turtle, Enki thwarts an attempt of a god to seize absolute power by creating a giant turtle and in a sense, releasing it so that it bites the hero's ankle. As they struggle, the turtle digs a pit with its claw, which both of them fall into. And Enki gloats, in a sense, at the defeat. Therefore, the ideas of the hero and the turtle are connected in the ancient Sumerian stories. Interesting enough, there's a shaman female burial in Israel that dates back to 12,000 years ago and found with many tortoise shells. And it seems that their funeral or whatever took place in like 6 stages. That this woman was buried. And there's about 86 tortoises or tortoise shells in the burial. And it's also in the area as a burial ground for at least 28 people buried in Nubian times or period. And one of the graves stood out, separate from other graves, by a stone divider, and with the body of objects surrounding it in a particular cave and tent. The skeleton of a woman about 4'9" and about 45 years old had been carefully placed in a grave pit with shells, horn cores from gazelles, and around her body represented a number of animals, mitten skulls, a wild cow tail, a boar's forearm, a leopard's pelvis, an eagle's wing, and a human foot. Religion, to me, is just an evolved product. In a general way, it all starts in animism, a theoretical belief in supernatural powers and spirits. This is physically expressed in or with, I believe, totemism, a theoretical belief in a mystical relationship with powers and spirits through a totem item, which then elicits a full-time specific person to perform this worship and believe interaction, I believe, leading to shamanism, a theoretical belief in access and influence of spirits through magical rituals. In addition, there is further employments of these myths and great spirits into gods and goddesses, added to all the above, which I see as paganism, and is often a lot more nature-based at its beginning than the current top religions that are also derivatives of paganism, thus hinting to their close link to the more ancient religion thinking they stem from. My hypothesis can be expressed in explanation of building in a theoretical house. Modern religious development as it is today. It seems ancient people had to survive amazing threats in a dangerous universe, and that they used superstition, perceived things as good and evil, and human immorality and imperfection of the soul, which was thought to affect the still living and led to ancestor worship. Presumably, this ancestor worship led to the belief in supernatural beings, which some of these were turned into the belief in gods. This feeble myth called gods were just a human-conceived idea that was made out of nothing into something over and over, changing again and again, taking on more and evolving all the while. They are thought to be special. However, it is just this supernatural animistic spirit belief perceived as something sacred. Historically, around 5,000 years ago, in large city-states, societies such as Egypt or Iraq culminated to make religion into something kind of new, a social, cultural, governmental, religious monarchy, where all, or at least many, of the people of such large city-state societies seem familiar with and committed to the extent of their religion in the area as the integrated life identity package of control dynamics with a fixed, closed, magical set of doctrine. However, this juggernaut of integrated religion identity package, full of dogmatic propaganda, certainly did not exist, or if developed, not extant all at once. It was highly limited at first in most smaller, prehistoric societies, as they seem to lack most of the strong control dynamics with the fixed, closed magical doctrines. These magical beliefs could be at times added or removed, and many people just wanted to see this development of religious dynamics put everywhere, even if it is not. Instead, all that is found is largely fragments until the domestication of religion after 5,000 years ago. Religion, as we think of them today, are a new fad, and something that does not go back further than 6,000 years ago in the timeline of human existence. Their connected ideas go back to the beginning. This amounts to almost nothing when seen the long, slow evolution of religion this 6,000, 5,000-year-old religion sets. Because we have the starting of worship around 70,000 years ago in South Africa with the worship of a stone snake, in one of the oldest ritual worships. The message of how religion and gods are intertwined with humans is clearly a man-made idea that has grown and developed slowly as it was invented, reinvented, interpreted, and reinterpreted piece by piece, which seems to understand it should discredit them all. This seems to be a simple point, which some are just not grasping how devastating this is to any claims of religion truth, when we can clearly see the lie in the archaeological sites. Understanding religion evolution, animism, totemism, shamanism, paganism, and progressed organized religion. Pre-animism starts around 300,000 years ago, animism around 100,000 years ago, totemism around 50,000 years ago, shamanism around 30,000 years ago, paganism around 12,000 years ago, progressed organized religion around 5,000 years ago. Religion beliefs often don't stay in the belief category, as if something that they can choose temporarily, and if needed, make it changeable if required. No, what is most common is religious beliefs are completely infused into the person's believed identity. Thus, it's not what they believe. It's more a factor of who they accept they are, or believe they are, or want themselves to be. What this means is, if they are later challenged and given reasons to let the belief go, this is largely destructive, because they and the belief are mixed in the person's identity, making it a loss. Not just a possible belief change or belief loss, but a perceived personal identity loss. Faith is being inspired to strong belief in that which, by the lack of proof, should inspire strong doubt. Faith is the self-indoctrination process of coming to believe in unjustified beliefs. The turbulent seas of denial are ever crashing like a tsunami of avoidance on religion's shores. With minds of cognitive dissidence and intellectual dishonesty, they welcome this eroding of thinking the religion believers perceive need to change belief in the face of facts when they want to keep the belief regardless of the facts. Thus, they joyfully dive, swimming deep under denial's dark waters, to safely into the arms of blind ignorance. Religions continuing in our modern world, full of science facts, should be seen as little more than a set of irrational conspiracy theories of reality. Nothing more than a confused reality made up of unscientific echoes from men's past. Rational thinkers must ask themselves, why continue to believe in religion stories? Religion myths, which are more than nothing, they are childlike stories of obsolete tales, once used to explain how the world works, acting like magic was needed when it was always only nature. These childlike religious stories should not be taken seriously, but sadly, too often they are. Often, without realizing it, we accumulate beliefs which we allow to negatively influence our lives. In order to bring about new awareness, we need to be willing to alter skewed beliefs. Rational thinkers must examine the facts instead of blindly following beliefs or faith. How can we silently watch as yet another generation is indoctrinated with religious faith, fear, and foolishness? Religion and its God myths are like a spiritual transmitted disease of the mind, destroying and hindering critical thinking. This infection, even once cured, holds mental disruptions which can linger on for a lifetime. What proof is faith of anything religions claim by faith, as many people can have different faith even in the same religion? May I remind you that when you start thinking you're out atheism, anti-theism, or anti-religionism is not vitally needed, just remember all the millions of innocent children who are being indoctrinated right now and need our help badly with the truth. Ones who desperately need our help to understand the truth, sometimes even what is truth. 3 things are common in all religions, things I detest: pseudoscience, pseudo-history, and pseudo-morality. And the biggest thing that irks me of all about religion is the widespread, forced indoctrination of children, violating their free choice of what to believe or not believe. I hate the force of hereditary religion. If you are a religious believer, may I remind you that faith in the acquisition of knowledge is not a valid method worth believing in. Thank you, and that's it.